Welcome to today's episode of the Cross Labs podcast, On My Mind.
So today we're going on record bad-mouthing a bunch of game developers and getting Cross Labs sued.
Good.
This is the Christmas episode.
Okay, so we cannot say the name of the game.
So the game that begins with N and has an M and an S in it, you were saying?
It's generally just an exception because like a lot of games just make the massive E3 trailer, get the pre-sales, and then just run away with the money.
Anyway, so Bethesda gets away with it, and they're known for basically letting modders fix their games. Paradox's business model is basically like put out an incomplete game and then use DLC over the next 10 years to sell 10 times as many $30 DLCs to actually make it a complete game as possible. I think people do like to be involved in the development of a game. They like to hear that their feedback has been taken.
I mean, that is it for a better game or just because if the people who's gonna spend the money is gonna tell you, I will buy it if you give me potatoes, then I'll give you a potato.
It's not quite like that. I think it's like placating reviewers when you write a paper. The really cynical way of thinking about it is the reviewer has to come up with something to criticize or they're not doing their job. So you want to write the paper to have like an obvious thing that someone's going to criticize that's easy to fix so that they choose that and then they feel like they've been listened to and then they accept the paper.
I like your strategy for reviewers.
I really don't, but it's unfortunately like one of these academia memes. Let's just do everything to stave off reviewer number 2.
You know how obvious I was with that strategy on my dissertation?
Oh yeah, that you put in a thing of I don't think anyone's reading this, so I'm putting this here just to see if anyone's reading it.
I mean, when I was like actually defending it,
Oh, okay.
I had slides prepared that I didn't present during the presentation.
Oh yeah.
But because I knew they were gonna ask about it, and then I just like present them.
Yeah, that's actually kind of a standard trick. You just put them as like hidden slides at the end of the presentation because the fact that you thought that you needed to say it but didn't have a chance to means that probably someone's going to be confused and want to ask. And then you've got a 50-50 shot that someone's going to ask the question. You're like, well, thank you for asking. Now I can give the part of the talk that, I didn't have time to talk about in the talking part of the session, in the questions part of the session, which it makes you look very clever. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's all of these tricks kind of make me wish we could just actually like give the talk that we should give and like let people ask questions that are actually questions you couldn't have predicted.
Today Felipe posted in the chat like that this research that is about the EEG doing the image reconstruction stuff, right?
You mean text?
Sorry, yeah, that was a different one.
Yeah.
Text. I was complaining about these like paragraphs in which they include some like super complicated math that only like you and Martin will get. I'm gonna try to see if I pass that to ChatGPT, if it does something understandable, because then what it's going to become, it's just people writing like complicated formal stuff that doesn't need to, just to appear smart. I'm not saying the authors did this, by the way, I'm just saying in the future. So then it will be like me passing like the thing I want to say to ChatGPT to make it look complicated, and whoever gets it does the inverse translation. I think you used that example for something else like 2 weeks ago.
Well, I mean, it's the usual stereotype is that you have very formal business emails that can be summarized as bullet points and that people want to read as bullet points. But because of the norms, you have to do the formal language. Otherwise, it's impolite. So you have ChatGPT write the formal language and ChatGPT read the formal language and translate it back into bullet points, and no one actually reads the email. It's just robots talking to each other.
I'll be amazed if this actually works. And I really hope it doesn't.
I probably will somewhat, at least. It will tell you something that you can't tell is wrong. I don't know for sure, but I've definitely seen ChatGPT writing style. I think the sad thing is that when I see it online on some, random blog post trying to gather clicks, I actually think that it's half the time it's ChatGPT, half the time it's a human who's writing in this like really artificial style because that is what gets clicks.
I think I'm gonna post this thing in the podcast episode if it actually gets into the edit, but ChatGPT actually does a decent job.
Well, so the thing is, you think it's doing a decent job, but it's, to me, that reads like reading the abstract of the paper, or like the stuff that if you knew how people generally do stuff, that is sort of what you would write about how you guess that some authors would have done something, given that they're working in that area, which doesn't mean that that's actually what the math that they wrote means. Like that's the big concern, right?
It sounds believable, basically.
Yeah, there are definitely papers where when you read the abstract, you can figure out what they did and you don't have to read the paper. It's like, oh yeah, okay, I see the idea. It's really obvious. I don't actually want to read what they actually did because they might have done it wrong, and I'd rather keep the like the abstract already gave me a good idea. I don't want them to ruin it for me. And so I'm just going to assume that they did it the right way and go with that. Like if I take it that the authors didn't just use the math to sound smart, but they used it to be specific, I wouldn't trust that this is catching everything that specificity was trying to catch. But if the authors were just using math to sound smart, maybe this is perfectly accurate, and this basically is everything that you should really get from the math section. So in that case, it might not be useless.
Now I feel terrible because I think this is a good paper. I just had an issue with that math because I'm not a mathematician, but well, that's not the author's fault. But I feel terrible if we use this as an example. It might seem like if we're just
beating up on the paper.
Yeah, but no.
Well, I don't know. I haven't looked into it to the level of detail to say whether or not the math is doing something important or whether it's performative. Like, literally, I have not read the paper well enough to review it, so nothing that I say should be taken as a representation of the actual paper, since all I have is this GPT gloss.
You just did the ChatGPT version of terms and conditions apply.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. Like, if you asked me to read a ChatGPT gloss of something and then judge the original paper, no, of course I can't. I already made my small comments, which is more about whether or not they can be specific about if they're decoding the visual system or if they're decoding higher level, like, linguistic processing, which I think actually does matter. Because if, for instance, you wanted to interact with a computer by thinking, which, is a thing that people want, if they're decoding the visual system, you're not going to get that. If they're decoding higher level processing, you might. But I actually, like, the machine learning methods, I don't care that much about. I think actually this is one of those cases where the really important part of the paper is specifically what was done in the testing protocol. And since they used a pre-aggregated data set, it's kind of hard to know just from the paper. I mean, without actually doing the proper, going and looking at everything they cite. Is that a criticism of the paper? Maybe it is.
It's a constructive comment.
I don't even know if it's that.
Wait, what paper are we even talking about?
There was a paper in, was it Nice Research or Research Bragging or something? Yeah, Brain GPT, which, like, please no, but...
Yeah, the title was such... I was like, oh god, no.
But that's actually what they did, so it's not that unreasonable. It's just like... They also don't call it that in the title. They call it D-Wave, which is fine. I don't know where Brain GPT came from, actually. Brain GPT does not appear in the paper, so I guess that was actually...
Oh, then that must have been Felipe.
No, maybe the YouTube video? Oh, the video's not available anymore. Okay. Who knows?
All
right, let me be careful here.
In our non-review.
Yeah, in our non-review. Yeah, this is going to be a very gripping podcast.
Yeah, absolutely joy to edit. If you're going through the visual stuff, then yeah, like there is a bunch of stuff that has been done like through it. It would actually be super interesting if what you said, or then also I posted, if some guy invents something that works between and not just within, like that would be super cool. Even if it's just for visual or anything, e.g.
Well, I mean, it sounds like they are actually making progress towards that with this. That's why I thought it was visual, because that's more likely to be structural than it is to be some, emergent organization. Or at least that's my prior assumption, I suppose. But given that the human visual system has, these very, very specific layers with edge detectors and things like that seem to be genetically coded, or at least by and large, that would be what would be the same between subjects.
But once something like that happens, we can also figure out ways of decoding is such a Hollywood word, but like to decode how other processes work. These type of systems could be used with people that have no access to their own visual system. So like, let's say you have someone who is like completely paralyzed.
Yeah.
This person could still communicate or whatnot if their brain functions are like working. Can you imagine if we are able to talk with someone like, no, vegetative state, it's already brain dead, right?
That's not going to work. Yeah. I mean, someone who is in a locked-in syndrome is probably what you're looking for.
There you go.
Yeah.
That would be incredible. Like,
yeah, I mean, you have to go beyond visual for that, though. Like, visual only won't do it for that. You need thought.
Yeah, you need thought. I can see like a path or something like that.
Yeah.
Once you can make something like that works between participants in visuals, then you go, okay, this is a path. Let's go to thoughts.
Yeah. Well, maybe. Probably not, actually.
It just sounds like a logical step. I'm not a doctor. Well, actually, I'm a doctor.
I think the issue is the stuff that has its topology, or not topology, but that has its structure formed via learning versus the stuff that's formed genetically. The stuff that is formed genetically, I think you have a good shot for, without doing any adaptation, two people could be read out the same way, it should work. The stuff that is formed via learning, well, everyone is going to have different life experiences. Someone whose first language was Spanish is going to have a different, their Broca's area is going to be structured differently than someone whose first language was English or Japanese or Chinese or whatever, in terms of like specifically like which sorts of oscillations correspond to which words or things like that. At least that's what I would assume based on, if I train two neural networks from random initial points on the same data set, there is a map between them, but the specific assignments of neurons or whatever are totally random. Now, that said, maybe there is a way of actually calibrating, so you don't just try to get it in one and hope that your model works across subjects, but maybe there's a way of calibrating without conscious participation. You can see that there is some sort of statistics of which patterns follow which patterns, and you can use the structure of those statistics to adapt your model to someone who can't actively participate in that adaptation. There is already some stuff showing that works for language translation, like zero shot, or very, very few shot language translation. There are these papers that use the shape in the latent space to spontaneously translate between like English and Chinese using only maybe 10 anchor words that they know are mapped to each other, because it's like the context in which the concept of red is used have the same kind of statistical structure between humans, whether they speak English or Chinese. And so when you see how words are used in Chinese, that particular statistical pattern is very high dimensional. And so it only corresponds to one other statistical pattern in English, even if you don't actually have a Rosetta Stone.
I now see what you mean when you said like stuff that is genetic and not stuff that is like learned. Because let's assume in that example, okay, if the concept of things is totally independent of language, then if I think about a car, like a thing that can read my brain would be agnostic of the language or whatever. I'm just thinking about a car, but I'm pretty sure that's not genetic, because it shouldn't be. So we could basically have like a universal language translator just because of our thoughts, but I'm pretty sure that's not how it works. That would be super cool, though.
I mean, like, I think needing a little bit of adaptation is not like a reason to lose hope. The fact that you have to do some calibration, as long as you can do the calibration without the person needing to be conscious and participating, you would still be able to use it to talk to people who are locked in. But I think like when I see that there really is no calibration needed, then that seems to me to be evidence about how exactly it's working, which is why I have this, I guess, bias that it's probably getting visual. It's probably like doing, image to text via their eye, via their brain, which is also kind of cool that you can do that, especially given something like EEG, or, well, if you can do that.
It's also the EEG. Like I read a bit on the setup and I was like, damn, that's some proper advanced EEG stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not a shock that you need a lot. I mean, given that the image stuff was with fMRI, so.
Yeah, one day it's going to be on the iWatch.
Sure. You don't want it to be, especially after that Cox Media Group blog post, right?
I have no doubt, no evidence either. I have no doubt that it's happening with my phone, at least.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like this advertising company either admitted it or they bragged about something they're not actually doing as an attempt to get people to pay for their ads. So what kind of sleaze do you think is more likely?
It's always ads. Always.
I think they can do it. They can do it. Oh God, Nicholas, you just announced the best crossover we didn't know we needed. So if we combine this conversation with the previous one about EEG, imagine that we create this EEG machine that can talk between brains and we include pop-up advertisement. That would be awesome.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, see, this is why I don't do AI anymore.
It always comes back down to ads.
Well, it's like there are these amazing things that it can enable. And everyone just wants to use it to make the world a little bit worse. Mm-hmm. It's like this gut, I don't know, knee-jerk reaction or something. It's like the very first thing is like, but how can we use this to make something I wouldn't want to subject myself to? But reflexively, I feel like we have to do it.
Imagine this person that cannot communicate with the outside world if it's not by using this AI with this EEG. But if he wants to say something longer than 2 sentences, he has to watch a commercial.
Yeah. Oh my God.
I mean, like literal captive audience.
Oh my God.
This is terrible.
This is how we get sued. Okay, let's see how it goes.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's how it goes on Shark Tank, though. I mean, they'll be like, "Oh, look at this amazing, like, life-saving medical device," and then the sharks are immediately like, "Yes, but how do we sell it to everyone under a subscription model?"
It's not even the thing about it being about money. It's like it goes beyond that to this sort of cartoonish. Even if it's incredibly inefficient and doesn't actually make money, we have to come up with the most miserable way for the world to be. Because, like, once the idea is there, we could do it, kind of thing. Like, because I'm not convinced that these ideas are actually moneymakers. It's just like somehow the signal of this is dangerous or this is hitting my dystopia detector gets changed from the therefore avoid it to therefore do it in some people. Who happen to be the ones who are funding things. What was that post by Joel about how the whole GPT LLM thing being a disruptive technology and therefore being economically very important is kind of fake because the people that it is disrupting basically make no money anyway. So it's yeah, let's replace all the writers and artists, the richest people in human civilization. No. Yes, the thing that will make us the most money is to replace the job which is often prefaced with the word starving.
That's it for this week's episode of the Cross Labs podcast On My Mind. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you'll be the first to know when the next episode is out. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.